We are going to go ahead and start our Stearns County Board of Commissioners meeting. Let the record reflect that all members are present and accounted for. And please join us in a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Okay, are there any changes updates to the agenda, Dr. Williams?
Excuse me, Madam Chair, there are not from this.
Okay, then I'm looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
So move. Second.
Okay, it sounds like we have a motion by Commissioner Bertram, a second by Commissioner Notch. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, pose same sign. Okay, our agenda is passed. Consent agenda. Members, believing everybody's gotten a chance to go through these, are there any items that you wish to have removed to talk about more? And if not, we can...
Madam Chair, I don't want it removed, but if I see several members from the county attorney's office, if I could get the actual grant for item E2, if I could get the actual application, and historically, since 2018, the monies that were received, and just a little bit more of that detail, I'd appreciate that. I don't need to pull it, but,
okay, and
I didn't have a chance to send the email prior, so.
Yep, and that is, okay, then that is something that Senator Klobuchar's office actually brought up at a meeting with her last week in D.C. So that was great, the work that's being done there. I'm looking for a motion.
Commissioner.
Do you have something?
Yeah. Commissioner Bertram, just concerns about that. That has been a very effective program.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what great need we have here in the county. So we've been very fortunate to get those funds. And so by all means, I want to applaud our ability to get those funds and what we've been able to do with
And
them.
members, if we're going to have any discussion, let's pull it. Otherwise, let's go ahead and move for a motion to pass, and we can perhaps get an update on that as well at one of our meetings. It's perfectly appropriate for any member to ask for a copy of things, so thank you. Somebody like to move the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
All right, there's a motion by Commissioner Bertram, a second by Commissioner Persky. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. All right, we have approved those. And members, it is perfectly fine if we want to remove something just to get some more information. Let's just make sure we the conversation. So that is all good. So our first item is Auditor-Treasurer's office. We're going to have presentation on the 2024 Tax Forfeiture Law and Update. Do want to thank you for the immense work that is going to this, given all the changes from the Tyler decision in the state. So Randy, we'll turn it over to you, and then let's go ahead and introduce who's for the public who's here to be presenting.
I have Mark Iverson, the Land Records Coordinator, and Alex Bussey, the Land Records Specialist that work on tax forfeiture. And as you mentioned, there's been a lot of legislative changes on this, and this is the result of a lawsuit that came about through Hennepin County and made it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. So with that, I'll turn it over to them. Mark.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I'm Mark Iverson. I'm the Land Records Coordinator for Stearns County.
Alex Bussey, Land Records Specialist.
So today we're going to give you just more of a general overview of some of the things that have changed with tax forfeiture. As we indicated, it's been a pretty significant changes that we're going to be looking at here going forward. So just some high-level overview. If you have questions, please certainly stop us, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have. So to get started, so what's happened? Tax forfeitures, we knew it basically changed. There was lawsuits, we've had settlements, there's been significant changes at the legislature, and resulting from that, a lot of new processes that we as a county and counties across the state are going to have to work through. Tyler versus Hennepin is the case probably most people are aware of, but from that, there's Sporleader versus St. Louis County, DeMars versus St. Louis County, and I believe that kind of got us into a class action across the state. But essentially, the United States Supreme Court ruled that Minnesota tax forfeiture law violated the takings clause of the Constitution. So following that, the legislature acted and they appropriated some funds for a settlement of any claims that are going to happen. And so the state of Minnesota set aside $109 million for claims. And just to kind of point on that, it's important to note that the counties administer the tax forfeiture on behalf of the state. So we follow the state laws. That's kind of our role. So we're not in any of the lawmaking or rule process for that. So we are now at a settlement phase for, we're gonna get into some parts a little later, but there's a settlement portion. We are a participating county. I believe of all the 87 counties, 86 are participating counties in the settlement. And from that, we were required to look back at any properties that forfeited. The settlement period is from June of 2016 through December of 2023. And so we had to provide the claims administrator that was set up by the court with any kind of information on properties that we had that forfeited during that time and that sold during that time. Properties that did not sell in that time frame, we have to make a good faith effort to sell those properties that are still in our inventory. And right now we have 11 properties that meet that threshold. So as I mentioned, this is for properties that sold from June 2016 through December 2023. During that time frame, we had 40 properties, tax forfeited properties that sold. So if we look at anything that's sold above any taxes, penalty, interest, special assessments, there is a potential equity there available from that time frame of about $325,000. But one of the things you will hear is that tax forfeiture in general isn't a quote-unquote money-making thing for counties. There's a lot that's lost also. So during that same time frame, we had 57 properties that sold, and they sold for a lesser amount than that. And we had delinquent taxes, penalty, interest, and special assessments that totaled over $1.4 million during that time. So that's a loss of dollars that were levied from school districts, from townships, from cities, from the county. So as I indicated from there, we have a new policy bill, and there's also legislative changes that are coming. And so there's some new statutes that come into play. And some of these items we have some additional notices that have to be provided to individuals. So even when properties first become delinquent, there's additional notification that have to be given for different programs and things that are available. When we do the notices of expiration of redemption, there's additional language for surplus. So if there's a surplus, how they'll be notified. We have multiple sales that have to occur now. So previously, we would have one tax forfeiture sale, and any property that didn't sell would be available over the counter the following day. Now we have a possible of 3 sales that are going to have to occur. Prior to the law changes before, the DNR, properties could be withheld. Right now, if the DNR has an interest in a property, they have to go through a condemnation process. So no longer does the DNR have the ability to just withhold them. There's a condemnation process that has to go through the court, and people have to be paid an equity out of that. We will no longer, so prior to the current changes that were made, we were able to offer properties that forfeited to cities. We have to get permission to sell, and they could be sold at a reduced sale price, and sometimes given to a city for free for blight purposes. If the property was going to be used for public purpose, that no longer is available until a little later in the process. And essentially, we're going to have to be looking at 2 different pots of dollars. We'll have a tax forfeited fund, and we're going to have another fund based off of settlement sales from settlements and going forward for any other tax forfeitures. There's also going to be a new claims process. So if there is potential equity, we're going to have to be notifying property owners of that equity and giving them the ways to request that. And any repurchase that happens now, if an individual who lost their property forfeit they have up until the time the first property sells, and they're going to have to purchase it for full price of the amount that were there. They're going to have to pay in cash. So no longer do we have the ability to work with property owners to do a contract to repurchase.
Commissioner Persky.
Yeah, you mentioned about giving the property to a city. You know, sometimes they skirt that process by offering $1 for the property. Is there going to have to be a market value? So, for example, if you got a blighted piece of property in the city, they want to do it for redevelopment because, you know, everybody would perhaps be benefiting from that, but it's going to cost more to develop the property than what's actually existing on the property. So are they still going to be able to acquire that, or is it going to require payment for something that's actually more of a liability?
It's a great question. And as it currently stands, if a city was interested in that property, of the 3 sales, the first sale is an estimated market value sale. So the city would have to bid and be the highest bidder at that sale. And if they weren't, they wouldn't get the property. If the property doesn't sell at an estimated market value sale, it goes to a minimum bid price sale, which they would be able to purchase it that way if they're the highest bidder in that portion of the sale. Assuming the property doesn't sell in either of those 2 sales, now we fall back to what is currently Minnesota Statute 28201, which dictates the way we deal with tax forfeited properties. So maybe later in the game they would have that ability, but on the front end, they would have to purchase it, either be the highest bidder for the estimated market value sale or at the minimum bid price sale.
Madam Chair.
Yes, and I know you got a slide on this too.
Yep, we do.
Do you want to ask
Just
now or
my,
you wanna wait till-
well,
Go ahead.
my point is this, is that oftentimes we got condemned properties that are, you know, dangerous and an eyesore, and we'd like to take care of them. But again, then the city and the county is paying more money for it than it's actually worth, and that's a burden for the taxpayers, and would rather not see that.
And Commissioner Persky, I think you've got an example of a property that maybe as we're going through this, you could even re-bring up and they could use it as an example about what we'd have to do.
Well, and since 2016, I think we've had probably 3 or 4. I know there was one in Richmond that we sold to them for $6,000 that is now a city park that they wanted for, which was in a nice development. It probably would have been a regular lot for 15 to 20 some thousand. I don't know what the market was for Richmond at that time. And then we had 2 in St. Cloud that eventually went to Habitat for Humanity, one for 15,000, I think, and then one for 30,000, and now are nice new homes on those lots. So
Okay, yeah.
since 16, we've had probably 3, 4, or 5, probably 5.
So on that point, our next slide here, now, as I indicated, there's a possibility of 3 sales. So prior to the new changes, we had a public auction. And there was one sale that people could come at. We had set a minimum bid price, and it went from there, and it would sell, or it would be available the next day. So now we must try to sell the property within, it's within 6 months of when the property forfeits or the date the property is vacated. We have to sell it offer it for sale at the estimated market value, the most recently assessed market value, for 30 days. And if it doesn't sell at that time frame, we also have to set a required minimum bid price, and it would be offered for a time frame after that. So those sales must occur within the first 6 months after forfeiture or the date the property is vacated. The minimum bid price, that sale also has to be set by the auditor prior to the first sale, and that would be the sum of all the delinquent taxes, penalty interest, special assessments, and any assessed costs. So if we know of any of our costs prior to that sale, that can be part of the minimum bid price. Again, and I mentioned before that if the DNR has an interest, once a property vacates or it forfeits, we have 30 days to get it to the DNR for their review, and they have 30 days to respond to us if they are interested in the property. And if they are, they have to go to the court through a condemnation process to determine a value to acquire that. So the DNR is no longer acquiring it for free.
So Joe, kind of back to your point here. So the first sale is an estimated market value. That's going to be set by the assessor. So we are going to try to work with them ahead of time, and if it is a blighted property, hopefully they'll put a low value on it. But that's the minimum price we have to offer there. And the city would have to compete with others to try to get that. The second one probably is a lower price for most part, is your back taxes, penalty and interest, special assessments, right? Then you get to the third sale, then we're back to the normal stuff we were doing before all this. So at that point, we could work with the city also, so.
So just for the public then, so numbers 1 and 2 are different than what we've been doing. How much of that was required by the Tyler versus the legislature?
Well, I will say the legislature came out of the need to change this based on the Supreme Court ruling, right? So we know we didn't have a legal process now that people had to be able to get that surplus. So AMC, I say maybe misstepped a little bit here. They came out with a proposal that was a court-intense process where everything would go to the courts and the courts would kind of divvy this up. And the legislature right away threw that out. And then we have a couple legislators that wrote this, and it's very administratively burdened. It doesn't deal with really getting properties to cities very well. It also doesn't give us time to work with land and homeowners for them to keep their property, which, as you know, we've spent a considerable amount of time in the past doing that. So, you know, I think at this point we're looking at trying this for a year or two and then maybe going back to the legislature and see if there's some changes we could do.
So while oftentimes we're looking at how are we giving people some certainty, this may be re-looked at in part because of the burdensome nature. It wasn't necessarily that was required out of the court decision, but this is what they
seem
came
to
up
go
with.
beyond,
Okay.
yes, things.
Commissioner Persky.
Yep. And then, so back to the appraised price or the value of the property. The demolition costs on very poor but blighted pieces of property, are the demolition costs factored into the value of the property?
From on the assessor's side or for us as we consider?
As far as the purchase price and the sale price?
No, not really. No.
No, and so going forward, really, prior to having that estimated market value sale and the minimum bid price sale, the likelihood of us doing anything with the property is very, very, very minimal. Because we want to sell the property as is at the estimated market value to see what equity could exist for that property owner. So really any demolition or any work on that property likely isn't going to occur for some time.
Commissioner Persky.
And that's, yeah, not that the demolition would occur, but I'm talking about the value of the property. Is the cost of that demolition included in the value of the property? Because if you've got a $20,000 liability and the price of, you know, the value of the lot without it would be at $20,000, and basically it's
Well,
zero.
so let's go through the three different parts here. So the estimated market value sale, it's based on what the assessor puts on it. Would they consider demo value as part of it? I'm not so sure, right? Okay. Whatever they value at is where we start. And then the minimum bid, that's really just the back taxes, penalties, interest, special assessments. Now, if we did do some things that we're required to as a public health hazard or something, those costs we could also add to that minimum bid amount, right? Okay. But generally, like Mark said, we're going to try to sell it first two sales as is for the most part. We get to the third one, now we're back to where we were before, and we can, fix up properties, we can do whatever, but remember, we have no excess now to deal with. So anything we do there, we may be paying for ourselves, right? It might be property tax levy dollars. Right. We're gonna have to be a little more careful there.
Yeah, one more, and then Commissioner Lenzmeyer.
Yeah, and then I don't know, I think I might know the answer to this. And then what about mobile homes? Because mobile homes are not on a piece of property that the owner has, but we do also have considerable, a few blighted mobile homes in parks that, are also something we'd like to clean up as well.
I would doubt that we would sell them at the first two sales, and the third one we'll try to get what we can, but most likely we'll take a loss on those.
But does but this applies to those as well? Okay.
Yeah. Commissioner Lenzmeyer.
It's optimistic for government to come up with one size fits all on problem properties. To make it more realistic, the market will determine what we can and can't do here. And what we're doing over time is making the process ever more complicated, so it makes it harder for the two folks to ultimately solve the problem. And they shouldn't have to solve the problem within a whole bunch of rules, but we're getting there.
Thank you. Go ahead and continue.
I think the rest of the presentation will probably answer some more of the questions.
Yes.
So some additional items for the policy bill. As I mentioned, we have additional notification requirements. Mineral interests that were acquired by the state before are purchased by the state. So when a property forfeits, default, it's a $50 that the state purchases the mineral interests. If a party feels that there is more mineral interest, then they have a process to go through the court to work through that. Now we're going to be dealing with any potential surplus. So if there is a property sells for more than what the taxes special assessments are, and there's a surplus, now there's a claims process. So if there's an individual one claimant versus multiple claims, so if there's multiple parties who feel they have an interest in that surplus, now that's going to be turned over to the court, and the court will get to decide through what's called the Rule 67 civil action. There's now expiration of surplus timeframes where people have to make a claim. But one good thing that did come out of it is that the county and the county auditor are entitled to absolute immunity through this process as long as we're following that statute through. So if there's a claimant and one single claimant and they're paid and someone comes back later and says, well, you didn't, we're granted full immunity from that. So, for us, what does this all mean? Well, going forward now, we are looking, there's basically 3 buckets that we have to look at, where before tax forfeiture was kind of one general bucket. Bucket 1 is going to be any of the properties that forfeited prior to June of 2016 that may be in inventory. I don't have any idea, the number of that could exist there, but any of those properties we would sell using the tax forfeiture process, the 282 process we refer to, that we use prior to Tyler. And excess funds, if there are any, would be distributed back to the cities, schools, county, based on what the statute was at that time. Bucket 2 would be the properties that we have in inventory during the settlement period from June of 2016 through December of 2023. So there's some unique terms of sale there that we have to make sure we follow. And then any proceeds from those sales, 75% we give back to the state, and then we get to keep 25%. And that 75% going to the state is going to go to the Minnesota management budget to offset that $109 million that they have set aside. And then bucket 3 is going to be any properties that forfeit from here on out using the new process. So again, we have new timelines, new requirements for our sales, and we do have multiple sales required. There's going to be less opportunity actually for property owners as forfeiture gets nearer, because we have some pretty strict deadlines we have to meet. So we will be engaging property owners probably a little earlier on than during the final year. So we're going to be doing some additional outreach just to help people, because as we like to say, a perfect year in tax forfeiture is that we have 0 tax forfeiture. We do not want a tax forfeit on properties. Our goal would be 0 tax forfeitures. Also, one big thing that came out of this as well is any repurchase of a property. So if a property owner wishes to repurchase their property after it forfeits, they have up until the time we first offer it from sale, so essentially about 4 months. And we can't do any contracts with them. They need to have cash. They have to pay it all up. So that's something that may be an unintended consequence of this kind of legislation. So this is kind of a confusing diagram, but it kind of shows you the world that we're going to be living in now. So I'll do my best to walk through this, but as you look on the top, we have the date of forfeiture or the date of vacating in red. So once it forfeits the first 30 days, we have to notify the DNR, and the DNR has 30 days after that. So the first 2 months is giving the DNR the opportunity to look to see if it's something that they would like to acquire, and then they would start the condemnation process. On the top part, you'll see from 0 out to basically 4 months, we have prepping any properties. So if we wish to incur, so we maybe do some minimal things if there's some real hazards on that property. You know, it's gonna be, we're probably gonna have to board up some properties and put some minimal cost in to make it as safe as we can. We'll have to deal with any personal property that's there, similar to what we do now. And then 30 days prior to our EMV sale, we'll have to do a publication. And we have to make sure we're gonna be reaching a wider audience. So rather than just doing what we do now, we're gonna have to reach out to different resources that meet diverse communities. We'll be doing more outreach to everyone. And again, that's always been our goal all along, to get any interested party there at the table that would like to purchase it. So for estimated market value, we have to offer it for 30 days. After that happens, we'll be dropping, after the 30 days is up, we'll be dropping it down to that minimum bid price. If the property is sold, we drop down to the claims process, where 60 days after the sale, we have to notify by certified letter, and we have to publish it on our website of the potential equity and give them the claim form to make that request. If we don't hear from anybody after those 60 days, within 90 to 120 days, we have to again send them a second notice to get a claim saying, it's out here if you'd like to request it. And that also starts a claims process. So once that claims process goes, basically at least 6 months after the sale is before we would ever distribute any kind of dollars. So up until that time, we're gonna be holding on to those funds until people have the opportunity to make their claim, and then 6 months after that is when the first time funds would come out. If it's vacant land, we just have to send the notice by first class mail. And again, through that claims, if there's no claims that happened, that would go to our tax forfeiture fund. If there's one claimant, we would pay that claim, and if it's multiple claims, it's gonna go to the court, and it'll be falling on their schedule. If the property isn't sold, we will be keeping this and working through our current tax forfeiture process. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and each individual property is different. So from the date of vacation, if a person vacating versus sale, we have a lot of moving dates, a lot of moving targets. And every year as forfeiture happens, we have a lot more to process. So some considerations we have moving forward. Tax forfeiture administration is going to be more complex. It's going to be more expensive, and we aren't going to have this, any kind of fund balances like we did before. So there's going to be added costs. If there's cleanup costs, you know, that is Commissioner Persky, as you indicated, that may be a cost that the county's going to have to incur if we're going to clean that up, or working with the local municipality. There's a lot of different timelines, so ongoing forfeitures, sales, claims administration, it's going to be very complex. And one question that's come up is, well, if someone is going to lose their property forfeiture, are they just going to have the county sell it? We don't know, but I can say that if someone is going to do that, once the property sells, it's going to be a long time. So if a property is to sell through forfeiture and there is a surplus, it could be 6 months, a year to year and a half is probably the best bet when they would see any of those surplus funds because of the time frame. And as Alex can probably attest to, if we have an individual who has a property that's up to forfeiture, we'll always encourage them, you know, it's probably in your best interest to get a realtor, try to sell the property for whatever you can, and take the equity for yourself. We don't want to sell property. We don't want to get property through tax forfeiture.
Yep.
And then also we have to consider pre-sale considerations, evictions. You know, sometimes people have to be evicted from the property, and that's going to delay any kind of sale, and it's not a fun process, and it's not going to, but it's going to delay when we have a sale, when we have to try to sell a property. You know, property cleanouts, we're going to have to consider what we do, what kind of funds, what public funds we want to put in for the cleaning up of that property. Open houses, essentially the things we used to do in the past where we would clean them out and we would have cleanup processes, getting rid of the blighted property. That's just not going to be happening for a lot longer now. So some legislative priorities that we've indicated would be great for the legislature to have some dedicated funding sources to help counties. Of the 87 counties, it's not just Stearns, but what are we going to do when we have these blighted properties, when we have these environmental concerns that are happening there? Where's the funding source going to be if we have no more sale proceeds to help offset those costs? You know, we'd like to see some simplified timelines and maybe clean that up to make it a little simpler. And then again, a big thing of just the clear and uniform statutory language on what counties are able to recover for costs for tax forfeiture administration would be a big item. So that is our general overview of tax forfeiture. There's going to be many questions as we go through the first couple years, but we'll stand for any questions you may have.
So many questions. Did you have a follow-up?
Just one
Commissioner
last thing.
Persky?
As far as the priorities here, is this something we might want to include in our priorities for the next legislative session, or do we have too many other things on the list? Mike and Randy, what are you thinking?
I imagine you always have a big list. I think the first one on the list is the one we'd be looking for in the more short term, is finding a dedicated funding source. And last year, AMC, I think, tried to get some of the excess surplus into a fund, and that didn't work. The other item that we were looking at and we were proposing is to up the D tax just a little bit. Provides a lot of funding statewide. So it would be, Stearns County, it would probably be okay if we kept our own, increase in D tax, but statewide, a smaller county, it's just going to take them so long to get that. So to have that as a state fund and then somehow managed by counties, that would be best. Because right now, these surpluses are paying for the cleanups and those costs. That's going to go away, right? So if you don't have some sort of funding, then it's property tax.
So along with that, are you anticipating that being on your affiliate, the Auditor-Treasurers, and is that something that's coming out of general government for AMC, just so that we're aware, because then it's on that list. Steve?
I was going to say, you mentioned, Mark, you have to remit 75% of the excess to the state. Maybe the state needs to keep that money in a pool so that the counties can submit a reimbursement for blighted properties.
So the 75% is just for those 11 properties that haven't sold in that
that's a one-time deal.
period. Then that goes away. So going forward,
Well, they could keep the fund there.
What's that?
They could keep the money there.
Yeah.
In the,
Well, they're hoping that 75% will help knock down that amount they set aside.
109 million.
Right. Definitely sobering. Other comments or questions?
The foreclosure process and the resale is a big loser, really, if you consider all the properties involved. In our efforts to make this a more viable process, we've made it less viable because we have to be fair. The idea that this creates a cash flow and, everybody involved has their hand out. So this is a difficult situation, even though we've got a process for dealing with it. For some properties, the situation is really dire. The best example is contaminated properties. But I'll conclude the lecture, spare all of you, and make you appreciate the meetings where I don't appear in person.
Oh, that's great. Jeff and I were in an earlier meeting, and you made a comment about thousands of things going through your head. I'm feeling like that right now, and two of them happen to be, what really happens, who's footing the bill on contaminated, or where there needs to be remediation, and right now that looks like our taxpayers. And then the other piece, I don't know if within your the simplified timelines, because you brought up the work that you've done with owners that are in the foreclosure process? I mean, I know you've worked on ones that are in St. Cloud as well as across. It's made a big difference trying to do that. For those who are concerned about equity, it would seem like going back to them and reminding them the best equity is being able to keep your property. So I don't know if there's something in that mix, how you're thinking about that right now?
Well, we're going to try to identify them earlier. The trouble with that is, you know, delinquency and tax forfeiture is like a funnel, right? So you start out, first year they're delinquent, it's a lot, it's a big number, right? And then it just keeps going down. We really get to a smaller number once we start sending them forfeiture notices, right? And so now you're dealing with maybe, you know, 5 to 10 to 15 or so properties. If you try to do this earlier, you might be dealing with 100 or 200 properties. So that's the little discouraging part of this. And we're certainly going to try, but it's just a lot more difficult. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Bertram?
I have a host of questions.
That haven't been answered already?
Correct. I want to make sure everybody had their chance.
Well, that's
So,
great.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
have we had any lawsuits in Stearns County?
No, we were part of the class action lawsuit for this.
Correct.
Yeah.
But individually, we did not have, which tells me obviously really wasn't our problem, but it's become our problem.
Right.
And then the 5, 10, 15 properties per year, currently right now we have 11. Am I following that right?
Well, we have 11 in inventory that didn't sell in that 8-year period or whatever.
Yep. So there's 11 properties.
We normally forfeit 10 to 20 a year. Is that about right?
Yep. We could just go quick. 2023, we forfeited on 5, 22, 6, 21, 5, 2023, 8. So in 16, we had 50. And then progressively, we've gotten down to probably single digits. And of those, maybe only 2 or 3 are desirable. Either they're small, undesirable, vacant land, or non-conforming, or things like that. So very few that are desirable properties.
And Madam Chair, the limited experience I've had in the last 2 years, I mean, we all know what these properties are in our districts. I mean, you can see that they're obviously not property. I only know of one that was just desperately terrible, and nobody, I assume we still have it yet. I'll ask Randy after the meeting, but you know, that obviously creates a problem. But there's people looking to buy these homes to rehab them to, which is a good thing. I mean, the bottom line is, you both said it, we don't want these. We really don't want tax for. And is that process 6 years from when it starts to? No? What's the timeline of when you start becoming, when you're not paying your taxes?
So if, let's take let's say the current year tax, 2024. So 2024 taxes become delinquent in 2025. So when they're delinquent in 25, you'd have 2025, 26, 27, it would forfeit in 2027.
So 4 years.
Yep.
Okay. And obviously, when you know these properties, Madam Chair, are coming, the longer they're there, the worse they get, the increased problems that, and why do I would assume most of these properties must be financed to some degree. Why don't the mortgage companies kick in sooner that it doesn't become a problem?
Well, part of the process when we start sending out notices is then the mortgage companies may pay them off, right? So we do work with them. Why they don't interview them earlier, I don't know that answer.
Because you would think, Madam Chair, that again, they see them getting worse. The payments aren't being made. You know, and if they stepped in, it kind of would eliminate our problem. And then prior owners being notified, I don't get that. So I own the home, and now the next property owner owns a home, or am I not understanding this? Why would I be notified?
You wouldn't be.
Okay. But what's the prior owners need to be notified in the legislation?
Well, once it forfeits, they lose ownership.
Got it. So it's really the current owner that,
current owner.
okay, got it.
Yep.
And then the assessed value obviously is normally, I mean, like you said, you know, minimum compared to what the bigger cost is. So if there's back taxes due of $10,000, big picture, that's the minimum amount of what?
Right.
Yep.
Right.
And,
Yeah. Well, and hopefully the assessors will work with them that they can get it to a reasonable, realistic value, and then we can sell it and move on, right? that would be the best.
And the potential, Madam Chair, the potential equity of the 325,000 and a loss of revenue 1.4 million, explain that. I'm not clear on that.
So that was in the past, that, those properties that sold during that time frame. So if a property, let's say there was $20,000 of taxes due at the time it forfeited and we sold it for $40,000, that would be the potential equity, talking about the 40 properties that sold. But generally speaking, tax forfeiture, when we sell a property for the sale price, a lot of times the value isn't there. So if there was $20,000 of taxes due, maybe that sold for $5,000, so there's a $15,000 loss. So that's when you look at those 57 properties we're talking about that sold for under what the total that would have been due at the time they forfeited. So to add to that, some of those are special assessments that are included in there that may be reassessed by a city at another time. But when we submitted the information to the claims administrator for this, we showed what properties had sold, what we had during that time frame, and what was due, what costs were, what they potentially sold for, what they didn't sell for. And so those numbers come from what was reported to the property tax administration for dealing with the settlement.
And getting back, Madam Chair, to Commissioner Persky's point, obviously when these buyers that are buying them to upgrade them and sell them, they're looking at back taxes due that would have to be paid. They're looking at demolition or whatever they need to do. They're adding those costs in order to purchase or make an offer on the property to obviously make it, and the more we can do to encourage that, because again, we don't want to. The quicker we, and I know Randy, you and I had talked over the last couple of years of aggressively trying to get buyers that say, you should look at that property and, buy it.
We've shown properties, right? We've done, let them walk the properties and different things, right? The more buyers we get, the better.
Two last questions, Madam Chair, is the DNR, I don't get that. Why the DNR? Why not MnDOT? If you're going to include an agency, why just the DNR? Do we know that? We're not doing that, but do you know why that is?
Those are generally conservation type properties that they would have an interest if they're adjacent to, currently I think it's 150 feet of lakeshore, or if it's adjacent to a current wildlife management area, things like that, properties like that. So if you look at a regular lot block house in town, the DNR has zero interest in that. So the properties the DNR are going to be looking at are going to be more conservation type ones that would fit into DNR management for preservation of resources and things like that.
And Madam Chair, I guess my point on that is if MnDOT or DNR or anybody wants it, then they should join the list of other people that might want to buy it. And I don't know why we're doing favoritism for that, but again, it's beyond us. I think if we would be able to craft the legislation, it would look a lot different than what it is.
So I'd say the DNR has been at times a problem dealing with tax forfeited properties. This clears that up. There's deadlines they have to meet. So that part of it is an improvement from where we've been in the past. So.
And then the last question, Madam Chair, is I'd be curious to see a list of the current properties that we have. And again, I do believe that we can, and I did bring several properties to someone's attention that ended up buying them because they're looking for those properties. So, we can all help in some ways to get them off, get them sold.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'd just like to point out as well, we take great strides. Alex works with, when we start notices of expiration, of redemption, we spend a ton of time working with property owners to help them stay in their homes. If we look at the numbers from 2022, we started with 34 properties, we forfeited on 6. There's 28 property owners that we've worked hands-on with, Alex has worked hands-on with, to make sure they stay in their home. So that's something we take great effort in, and Alex does, especially working with people to make sure that we're not forfeiting, doing anything we can do to help.
And hopefully that's one of the things the public takes away if they're listening, is that the first goal remains that property owners are able to keep them. And certainly the questions and then the comment that you gave Commissioner Bertram about, making sure they're trying to have a private sale is a good one too. Okay.
One yes and no
Persky
question.
and then not.
If there's hazardous material or contaminated soils, is there state funds for cleanup, or is that going to be a burden of the buyer or the county?
We've used those before. There's potential there, yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Nutt?
My only comment is when you have to use the estimated market value, you're going to take a lot of people out looking for these
Absolutely.
properties because they're going to say, well, if I have to pay estimated market value and do all this work, it's not worth it. Whereas before, if it was just the delinquent taxes and some other assessments, they'd say, oh, there's a margin there for me to buy this and make it work.
I think it's widely believed the first sale, which why we're looking at maybe doing an online auction for that one, is you're just not going to get any interest in that one. So the second one, and then might have some, and then after that, of course, we can set the price and do what we want.
So some of this is becoming perfunctory as, you know, okay, we're doing it, but it might not actually yield anything. Commissioner Bertram?
One last question. Is it my understanding that once it becomes delinquent, is it up to the state to do the maintenance, the upkeep, like mowing the grass, or wasn't that the case at one point?
When the property comes delinquent?
No.
No, it's, the property's bid into the state, which starts the redemption period, but that process is, that property is still owned by the current landowner. They have we have nothing to do with it up until the time the property forfeits.
But if Madam Chair, if the grass isn't mowed or what have you, this goes back to 86, 87, a property in the city was in a city in my district was like the grass was, and I went to the city and they said, well, it's the DOT that has to maintain it, and the DOT had to go in and maintain it.
That must have changed, maybe not too long after that. It has changed, which is why I could see Shelley almost chopping a bit. I mean, we do have some properties that get to be, that are not towards foreclosure, that are in such rough shape that we end up having to come in, and there ends up being costs involved.
Once it forfeitures, then there's, you know, a little shift that we'll try to maintain it more. But even before that, you're right. If a property's in the middle of the city and it's not looking well, the city can go in there and like mow the grass and then assess the property back, assess the cost back to the property. But now, you know, you're adding additional costs that's going to help make it less sellable, right? So,
Yeah. I suppose a little local color on that. Recently, the St. Cloud City Council and Mayor had allowed folks to do the no mow May, and there were people who took advantage of that for all of the months after that. So they had to go back and rescind that because there ended up being some pretty awful ones. And they said, you better mow, or we're going to do it, and then we're going to charge you. You will get charged for that. Commissioner Persky, did you have one more?
We're good.
Commissioner Nutt?
I was just going to say too, you know, when it's in a bank foreclosure, even a bank can't step foot on that property until that foreclosure process
Right.
ends. You know, because technically it belongs to that homeowner.
Right. It's a hard and challenging process, and some of it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, and now it's become harder, partially due to the U.S. Supreme Court, and then added to by our legislators. So to the extent we're able to see what are those things that we can ameliorate, make work better and more efficiently, let's do that. Thank you for this. Hopefully you're willing to come back again at some point and give us another update about what you're seeing and what we can be doing.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So members, we're a little bit behind, but this was a really good and important conversation. We're about to now enter into another really good and important conversation. And when they are done, that's when we're going to take our break, not 10 minutes before we're done. So now we're going to move to the presentation on the next part of the cannabis ordinances. And we're going to both have opportunity for discussion. And we're also going to be setting a public hearing. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Shelley, and really glad everybody else is here.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Shelley Benson, Environmental Services Director. We have 3 people here to go through the presentation. The first portion of the presentation is going through the zoning ordinance amendments, or adding this to the zoning ordinance, since we don't have anything related to cannabis at this time. And then we have 2 of the attorneys from the County Attorney's Office, Brenda Tice and Chad May, and they are here to discuss the other portions related to the regulatory compliance portions of this act that we'll be enjoying in January.
And for those either here or at home who want to follow along on the presentation besides the screen, there is a copy of this in the packet. Ms. Berg.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Angie Berg, Environmental Services. Just a little shout out to the control room. They were going to have my presentation up for me, so
we're just
hopefully
waiting for that.
They can get that up, and in the meantime, I will get started.
I think they're working on it.
So we are in front of you today, as Shelley said, to talk about a couple of things. One is to amend the land use and zoning ordinance as it relates to cannabis. There's multiple sections of the ordinance that will be inserting cannabis regulation into. It is going to be Section 3, which is our definitions, Section 6, which is what we call our performance standards, which are the specific district applications, Section 7, which is our general development, and then Section 9, which is the zoning district. So that's the section where all of the uses are listed in either prohibited, conditional, interim, etc. Secondly, Brenda and I believe Chad will also talk about the creation of what is titled the Cannabis Events Retail Business Registration and Compliance Ordinance. So there's really two steps, there's really two parts to this. So there's the land use component, and then there's the registration component. And so like many counties and local governments, have chosen to do that in two different ordinances. Basically, so the zoning ordinance can just insert what we have currently. This is gonna maybe vary a little bit from what's on here. I thought I was gonna display my screen, but that's okay. We'll get caught up here in a minute. So just to kind of set us off, we're gonna begin with the end in mind. And Madam Chair, you also mentioned that a little bit as well. We're gonna have some discussion. There'll be some questions we can answer. There'll be some questions we cannot answer, but we will get answers for you. We are hoping after today we can send the proposals either as proposed written or changed to townships and cities, because the board has always wanted to give them at least 30 or more days to have their discussions. And then we, again, are hoping to set a public hearing at one of your next meetings. The last meeting that you'd want to have a hearing would be December 17th, because as we know, the legislation goes into effect on January 1st. So we have to work with publication dates of our local newspaper. We'll go through this again at the end. Okay.
And I'm hoping before the end of it, if you have a recommendation about whether we should be trying to do that on the front end or on the back end, that would be a good thing too.
Okay, thank you. So who makes the decision in terms of the zoning portion? That's our planning commission. That's your appointed members, and that comes right out of the Stearns County Planning Commission ordinance. So they recommend these changes to you related to the zoning ordinance. As far as the registration ordinance, that is under your purview. So the county board will hold a public hearing on both ordinances. You could do that, I would assume, at the same meeting, but it would be two separate actions. So a little bit of background and history, and I know you've heard a lot about this at your affiliate meetings and AMC and whatnot, so I'm not gonna go through all of this, but what we do know is that legislation passed in 2023, and it's Minnesota Statute 342. That was included in your packet in its entirety. Local governments may register locations once there is pre-approval from the newly created Office of Cannabis Management, otherwise known as OCM. But regardless of what the local government does in terms of registration, zoning still has a part. So there'll be a little flow chart I'll show you in a little bit in terms of how that will work. And similar to Mark's presentation on tax forfeited, we don't have the option not to do this, right? So we do have some options, but we'll explain to some degree how they are limited. So what have we been doing for the last 6 to 9 months? We've been analyzing, basically looking at the statute and identifying what are the different business types that will be licensed by Office of Cannabis Management, and how are they most similar to other land use types that we have in Stearns County, and sliding them into the same zoning district or the same performance standards, because after all, this is just another land use, right? And so, as you've probably heard many times, the law does allow local governments to have regulations for time, place, and manner. That's not new for zoning. That's what you do a lot of times with where and with setbacks and with hours of operation, things like that. The proposals that will be going forward with you today does meet the intent of the law, and it is also based on a lot of collaboration and cooperation with Association of Minnesota Counties has been very helpful, and also the Office of Cannabis Management. So again, our role in terms of zoning is we will be approving the location and applying our standards. So just like any other land use, the only difference here is that license holders, so licenses are granted by the state, they have to apply for pre-approval at the state. And once that happens, then they will apply to Stearns County. So there's some things in the law that requires counties to make a decision within a certain amount of days, which doesn't really work with conditional use permits and interim use permits. So Office of Cannabis Management has basically indicated that they first have to pre-approve, and then they would come to us, and that will give us the time to do that. And then thirdly, the registration is something that would also occur at the county. So license is at the state, zoning is at the county with environmental services, and then the auditor's office, I believe, is what Shelley and Randy have been talking about, we'd have a joint role with the registration. Our continuous roles with other department obviously continue to exist. They're just not here today because they're really ongoing efforts. Obviously, public health is involved in ongoing education. The sheriff's office will be involved in looking at compliance checks. The auditor's office, we touched on that already. And the assessor, because that's always a question that the board asks, is how will these properties be assessed? And so that is very clear in the state law, and that is listed here. Basically, they are allowed to receive a first-tier classification, and they would be considered commercial. Okay, so we're going to get into some definitions and what all the different license types that we're dealing with. So there's 13 license types. 9 are currently available to what the statute calls social equity licenses. And then in terms of the definition section, there's a lot of terms that need to be defined. We are not going to propose to define them all in our ordinance because they are likely going to change as the legislature makes changes throughout the years. So we're just going to be referring to or referencing the statute when it comes to definitions. So these are all the license types. I'm not going to read them to you, but if you have questions on any one of them, just shout out and we can talk about it. So cultivator is your growing operation. Manufacturing is going to be manufacturing, making the product into something to sell. A wholesaler would be what you think a wholesaler is, right? Transporter would be basically just your transportation, your trucking operation. Delivery service is a new concept a little bit to some of us. I think about this as being like food dudes for cannabis. Okay, so that's all that is. There was some medical cannabis provisions in the prior statute, and they have changed a bit. Now it's called a medical cannabis combination business. So the legislature in this process of amending 342 took some different license types and merged them into one. Testing facility is where there's a lot of regulations on different levels of THC and et cetera, so they have to be tested, so there's going to be likely businesses that would do that. These are the most curious, probably, terms that we're not familiar with. Micro and meso, just think of micro being small and meso being medium. Micro is where you get to do a little bit of everything on a small scale. So you can cultivate, manufacture, sell, you can offer on-site consumption. And then meso is the same concept, but you can just do more of it at more locations.
Can I ask a quick question with that? So the state generally talks about or defines micro businesses as 0 to 2 FTEs. Is it the same with this, or is that different? So it could be parts of several people, but it could just be the person who has another job, but they're doing this on the side. Are they talking at all about that? Because that's usually how micro is quantified?
Madam Chair, I think I have a slide that talks a little bit about the numbers. It's basically, it's based on the number of license types an individual can have, and then also the volume that they're growing.
Okay, so it may be more about the size of their neutrally sane operation.
Right.
Versus how many employees. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, Commissioner Persky.
And then as far as location of sales of the property, does it have to be a separate establishment? So looking out in the rural areas where we might have one liquor store in the township or one liquor store in a municipality, can they sell that within the liquor store, or does it have to be a separate venue?
I don't have the answer to that question, Madam Chair, Commissioner Persky. It's something we can
So we can add that into the
write
list
down,
of
or
questions.
is that something that the registration ordinance will address? I'm not sure.
Okay.
But
Well, hopefully somebody's keeping a good tally, because I'm guessing we're going to, between all of us, come up with some questions, as you pointed out at the beginning, you might not know yet. And it is very likely that as we get through this process, we will have made some determinations and yet still have questions that we will need to come back and address after they do more legislation too, right?
And I guess Chad May, Assistant County Attorney, I can add a little bit to that. A lot of this will be at the involvement of OCM. We still don't have, a situation where we've gone through the process or they've given feedback on the license. So that'll be part of it as well. We'll have to adapt to the level at which they're involved in the licensing. We're hoping it's at a level when it comes to us, a lot of the boxes are checked, obviously, because it's a state entity that's doing that. And if that is, that will clear up some of the questions, but that'll always be part of it, like we were saying.
Thank you.
okay, and I think last but not least would be the retailer, and that would be what you would consider the store, right, where you would go purchase your cannabis and your cannabis products. Okay, so we had a question already on that concept. If see none other, I'll go forward to the zoning districts. And so then again, this is in our ordinance section 9 where our uses are listed. This is the spreadsheet that we prepared for the Planning Commission. And it basically takes in your left-hand column where it says, I'm gonna reference it. It's going to be column A. That's your license type by OCM. So that's everything we just went through a little bit ago. And it's defining it, and then in column C, D, E, and F, that's our zoning districts. And so within those, we have proposed where these uses are either going to be permitted, conditional, interim. I think that's it. So this is what the Planning Commission saw. This is what the Planning Commission recommended. To the extent that the board would want to vary from that at some point in the future after holding public hearings, you'd have the opportunity to do that. This next slide talks just about medical cannabis and also hemp. And so the concept with medical cannabis and hemp was that if we're going to allow cannabis in various zoning districts, these are in theory maybe less restrictive or less content of intoxicants. So we really just mirrored what was allowed for cannabis, for medical, and for hemp.
So can I ask a question that you may absolutely say, okay, put a pin on that, we'll get to it. Once this becomes more established, will it start working the way other licenses, et cetera? I mean, how will that differ? And you may not know yet. And then because we cannot prohibit, and there are minimums, I believe, that we have to at least have, how will that work, and how does that interrelate with the work of the Planning Commission or this board?
Madam Chair, I think Brenda's going to touch on the
Okay, good. Then that's the pin.
the ordinance. Yeah.
After I read through it, I meant to actually call on Friday, and I apologize that I didn't get a chance to do that.
There's no perfect way to really go through this other than just kind of dump it all on you at once. So
Nope, that's good. I think we're all fine with you telling us we'll get to that.
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So next, again, this is the portion of our zoning ordinance that talks about about how you have to do things. So parking and lighting and stormwater and all of those things. So again, looking at this as just any other land use, we basically took all the license types which are in row 1, so that's your cultivation, your meso, micro, and then listed within that business type, what do we care about? What do you have to show that you can do? So access, outdoor storage, transportation, all these things. As you can see, there's a lot of check boxes because we want to be maybe a little bit more conservative at the beginning because we don't know what these businesses will look like. So we want to make sure that we are covering everything that we need. Again, and I have a few specific slides related to hours of operation because I think that's going to be something you're curious about, and then also setbacks. The rest are really all of the same standards we'd apply to any other business. Same here. These are what we call our general performance standards. So these would be your screening, your drinking water supply management area, lighting, ADA, standards that have to apply to all uses. And then the portion that's listed below in the green, this is derived from Minnesota Statute 342, so that's the cannabis statute. Part of that statute promulgated rules, and so as you know, we have the legislature will enact a statute and then they will oftentimes assign to an agency to make rules to talk about how governments and how we can administer the statute. Well, this happened not in the way that it normally happens, because normally you'd have the statute, you'd have the rules, would take probably 12 to 24 months, and then we'd all have time to enact our standards. But that's not what we're dealing with here. So as we're all talking about our zoning ordinance and registration ordinance, they're still talking about the rules. And so some of these things related to ventilation, cultivation plan, security plan, these are placeholders for you right now because we don't know what the rule is going to say, and the rules should be done by the end of this year. So that's why that's kind of separated out a little bit differently. That applies to the same as well on this page. Okay, so a couple portions of the performance standards just to look at. So the law does allow, like we said, time, place, and manner. So it can allow for cannabis businesses of any type to be prohibited within 1,000 feet of a school, 500 feet of a licensed daycare, 500 feet of a residential treatment facility, and 500 feet of a public park or playground. And though, I'll take a step back. Chad May and I have been talking a bit about this, and so that distance would go from the property line, not from the structure or from the outdoor parking area. It's from the line of the property. Just FYI, that is consistent with other setbacks that we have in our ordinance as well. This section of setbacks is optional. Local governments do not have to require this, but the statute allows you to do it. The statute, in our opinion, I believe would be shared by Chad and Brenda, doesn't allow us to be more restrictive than this.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. It does allow
Does
or does
not.
not? Does not.
This is not an active map, but I do have an active map. The GIS folks were really helpful in creating a map of really looking at where these businesses could be. When I did a presentation with AMC, or Office of Cannabis Management, St. Paul was there, and St. Paul's map looks the opposite of our map, right? Because we have such rural, vast spaces of land. And so in Stearns County, everything that you don't see has either a green line, which is a trail. The daycares are the little playground portions. Those are technically areas where some sort of cannabis license type could be allowed. So we believe that this meets the intent of the statute by not prohibiting it to the extent that, or not regulating it to the extent that it's prohibited. The other interesting part, and I actually have handouts for you guys. So you'd think that this is easy to understand, but we kind of struggled with this a little bit. So retail sales prohibition, so the law does allow for counties and cities to prohibit retail sales with specific hours of operation. So what's being handed out now is a little chart. If you're a visual learner, my battery's running low. So basically what we have here is in red. In red is where the statute says that the state will not allow cannabis retail businesses to be open. So that's the minimum. So we're calling that the state minimum prohibition. We thought it was interesting to share with you all that how the state alcohol prohibition is, just because this tends to be, a similar use. And so then in the green is where retail cannabis sales would be allowed. All the question marks are areas where if you wanted to try to closely match retail sales of cannabis to that of alcohol, you would basically take all of the question mark lines and you would make that into where you would prohibit under the local control. So basically the law says that you can add to, but you can't go beyond that. So we can't dip into the green and prohibit on those hours of operation, but we can dip into the areas that are aligned with those question marks. What the Planning Commission did as far as our recommendation on this is they wanted to as closely match alcohol sales. And so if you did that, it would basically be, filling in those question marks with where it would be prohibited. And obviously there's some overlap, for example, on a Sunday where you'd be able to buy cannabis and you cannot buy alcohol. That's just the way that the laws are written.
Or you mean buy alcohol in a store versus alcohol at a restaurant or a bar?
Sorry,
Because clearly
off sale.
Off sale.
Yes.
Did you have a question?
Yes, and that's talking about off sale and on sale. And I saw it was listed about number 11 was events, and it said that events would be allowed on commercial and industrial properties. So are we perceiving that we might be able to have a vendor on a truck or at a tent, let's say for an event, let's say Summertime by George, Fire Fest in Cold Spring, Oktoberfest at any of these small villages? Will they be able to sell at the event then?
Well,
Ms. Teese?
from my reading and my understanding, the Office of Cannabis Management would have to decide whether they could get a license to get, I feel like
Just hold it.
Okay.
There you go.
the Office of Cannabis Management would have to decide whether they would get a license. But local control, there's local control for events. That's where if Cold Spring says, no, we're not going to allow it, they can say no.
And then for the public, as it relates to
With regard to just talking about that one.
the events, or even with this, is it solely the unincorporated areas that we have the ability to, like everything else, right? I mean, if an incorporated, if the city of St. Cloud decided to do something, or the city of Cold Spring decided to, there really is nothing we can do about any of that, right? We are looking at the unincorporated areas. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. I see Shelley nodding, but I wanted to make sure you were nodding. Thank you.
Yes.
Madam Chair, for zoning, yes. For registration, no.
Right.
And Brenda will get into that.
Yes, that's why.
And Madam Chair, Commissioner Persky, further on your question, probably what you saw in the packet as well in terms of events, there is the concept or the idea that somebody could create an event, a cannabis event where people can buy, sell, use cannabis products at I think it's limited to 3 days or something like that. So
just real quickly, instead of a wine tasting, they could have a cannabis tasting.
that's our
at a
understanding.
place. Okay.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, Commissioners, that is
Mr. May.
referenced in the statutes as well, but we have been talking about, we do have event ordinances, and we may have an event ordinance for this, just to make sure we're covering our requirements to match the state, so.
Thank you.
Yeah, the proposed ordinance we have is just a draft. It can be amended. We can include things or exclude things.
This may just go under the questions, right? What does that mean in processing that?
Okay, moving on to what does our comprehensive plan say about this? Well, clearly when we adopted our 2020 plan, cannabis wasn't required. But highlighted here are some areas where you could argue cannabis would fit. Obviously, there's people that could argue that they don't fit. But these are just some areas that, we talk about agricultural goals, business goals, transportation corridors, et cetera. So we just wanted to try to tie back what we're talking about to the comprehensive plan. So again, back to the next steps that we talked about earlier. It would be our goal today to authorize, to have the board authorize us to send this out to cities and townships so we can get something in their hands to start talking about. Then would be to set a public hearing so we have a date on the books so we don't fall short of that January 1st deadline. And so as far as the zoning part goes, that would conclude that section. I believe Brenda's going to talk a bit about what we're calling I'm going to pull it up, Cannabis Events, Retail Business Registration and Compliance Ordinance. And Madam Chair, that gets to your question earlier about how many do we have to allow per our population and how is that going to work?
This is our first opportunity to review the ordinance with you, the proposed ordinance for this registration and compliance checks of retail cannabis businesses within the jurisdiction of Stearns County. The plan is to allow you to review the proposed ordinance and get back to us
Brenda,
with your
I'm sorry, I have
questions.
to ask you to get really close to that mic so the people who are not in this space can hear. I'm so sorry. It's called the Eat the Microphone request. Thank you. And it looks like that microphone doesn't want to be helpful.
I know.
Thank you.
The plan is to allow you to review the proposed ordinance and get back to us with your questions and feedback. And then we can come back to the board again with answers and proposed revisions. And we're expecting a public hearing on the ordinance sometime. I was thinking it would be early in November, but it could be later as Angie set out earlier. In this situation, we provided some attachments for this agenda item. They include a copy of the cannabis statutes, and references to specific provisions are noted in the proposed ordinance itself. So if you're looking for where the information or the requirement is located, it's specified in the ordinance. And we also provide you with a copy of the Stearns County Alcoholic Beverage Statute. Now, this ordinance that we've drafted is modeled after the county's alcoholic beverage statute. They're both intoxicants, and we saw that it's likely that we would be treating them the same or as close to the same as we can based on what the statutes allow us to do. I have just want to point out some sections that I believe the board will have particular interest in. The first one you will note is jurisdiction at section 2.1. We plan on coming back to you with a proposed agreement that can be entered into with other local governmental units with regard to providing the registration and enforcement under our proposed ordinance by these other governmental units, such as towns and some cities. One of the things we looked at with regard to cities was the fact that the county does provide compliance checks for alcoholic beverages to certain cities. There's a number of them. I counted, I've gotten a list from the sheriff's office. There's 14 small cities that the sheriff's office does provide compliance checks for because they do not have the capacity to
do the enforcement. They don't have law enforcement on their own, and the sheriff is covering these cities. I have a list here if you're interested. I can provide that to you. We also there's also, just going to go through another section here that I thought might be of interest to you and looking at and thinking about on for the next meeting or the next opportunity that we have to discuss the proposed ordinance, and that's the cannabis events, section 5 of the proposed ordinance. It requires local approval, and that is required under the statute. The Office of Cannabis Management issues the license and provides for compliance with operational requirements of the cannabis statutes and compliance with operational requirements. This is our proposed ordinance. It provides for also requirements of the county's large gathering ordinance for events organized for 1,000 or more persons over the course of the events. Now, the license that the Office of Cannabis Management can issue for the events is for a period of 4 days, up to 4 days. We do not have control over whether the license will be issued or not, other than to say the location. If they're looking to get approval for a license for an event, they have to get pre-approval from the location, from the governmental entity of that location. Our ordinance also provides for compliance checks for age limit requirements and applicable operation requirements, limits on the type of cannabis and cannabis products being sold. Violations are subject to our enforcement under the ordinance, including criminal misdemeanor penalty or civil enforcement provisions. So the next item you might be looking at as a talking point or of interest to you would be the limited number of retail operations that's allowed. It's under section 6.1 of our ordinance, and we are basing our limitation based on the number of residents within the county. And we set the limit at 13. Again, this is something that the county decides whether they want to have this limitation or not. It should be known that if a city decides that they want more than what's limited by the county, they could actually allow that in. That would mean that that they would be handling their own ordinance, that they would be doing their own compliance checks, that they'd be basically saying we don't want to follow the county's ordinance.
So if they would choose, so this is, in some ways, it sounds like this is a little different than some of the other things. Let's say we encourage all entities to use with whatever we come up with, because we often do that, especially for smaller entities, but that they're choosing to do something differently, they can. And then, let's say, before we even get to any other areas, 13 have already been done. Does that impact what else we do? Or do we don't look at that? Do we need to be looking at least 13? I don't want anybody that's listening to think I'm just trying to make sure we have the smallest amount we possibly can, but trying to figure out what does it actually mean for us as a county. There's 5 in Way Park and 7 in St. Cloud and 14 in Sartell. I'm making up numbers now, ridiculous numbers, 1 in Melrose and 1 in Paynesville, et cetera. What does that mean for the county?
What the county has set their 13, my understanding is that if the 14th one comes in and says, hey, I'm going to go to, I'm going to see if I can't get in St. Cloud yet or Wade Park. And so the city says, yes, well, we have room for another person or another business to come in. Then the county, once they have the 13, whether they're in the cities, wherever they're located, once the 13 within the county are there, the county would not have to register or allow any more in. The local governments could still allow additional businesses in, but they would not be subject to the county ordinance. They would not be following our limitations, so they would be basically handling that on their own. And usually the big cities are the ones that you're gonna see more coming in anyway. So if all 13 are done in the city of St. Cloud, let's just say.
Don't do that, pick other.
Then there wouldn't be the county would not have to have any more out in the.
There's one school of thought that everybody that's selling gummies in any way, shape, or form, or any of the THC will want to do this. I don't know what that means. Like, is there a current map we could look at about which entities are doing it? I mean, it sounds like we could get to the point where you hit 13 very, very quickly. And that doesn't mean there will only be 13, but it does mean it may not be in some areas that somebody might want unless they say, nope, we're going to do it ourselves. I think that's correct, Joe? Go ahead.
Okay, so once we hit the number of 13 with the city of St. Cloud and other small cities, okay, then the townships could say they could deny. But if we have not reached that number of 13, then the townships would have to comply. They will allow that because we must have at least 13 or could have at least 13, correct?
So, Madam Chair, Commissioner Persky, the defining factor here is local government unit and what that is. Now, each city is their own, and we do not have control over that. We are the county and unincorporated, right? So let's assume each city decided they wanted to have unlimited. We still would be required, as our own local unit of government, be required to meet this standard. So I think the first question we want to think about is, what government unit are we talking about? Is it the county or the cities? And it's completely separate. Townships, we have, for the zoning and other aspects, we are obviously going to help out the townships in that respect. And I want to say this, there is a potential for cities to ask the county as part of an agreement to cover them as well. We would be able to decide whether we wanted to do that or not. If we did, that would absorb that local government unit into the county, which then eliminates a separate local unit of government, so.
Okay, got it. We're almost going to need a flow chart for that or another map, right? Commissioner Bertrand.
I'm trying to hold my questions, Madam Chair, but to that point specific. So if you've got a community that's 22,000 people, is it 2,500? There's a threshold there of the population, isn't there? Of who, like if you're under 2,500, you don't have to have any. Or am I confused on that?
I'm confused on that. What do you mean, Jeff?
I think they know it. Let them answer it. If you're a population of 2,000 or 2,500 or less, I don't think you have to have any. It's over that. We've heard so much information from AMC and everything that I'm not trying, but now to that question and to that point.
So,
and if you don't know the
Can an
answer.
entity exempt out?
Yeah, if you're a town under 2,500, which Painesville happens to be, they don't have to have any. But if you're over 2,500, you have to allow at least, you have to be open to allowing one. That's, in my simple mind, that's how I understand it.
In that I don't know exactly onto the numbers, but I do know that the question or the number of residents that are evaluated for that specific question would be, what is the governmental unit? If it's part of the absorption of all, then no, but if it does remain its own, then it could impact that number, but we'd have to look and.
Yeah, is that something you could get back to us on if you don't know?
Yep, and it's written in the statute for every 12,500 residents, there has to be one active registration. So that's where we came up with the number 13 was based on the 12,500, and that's right in the statute.
So, Madam Chair, I was only off 10,000. That's not bad. Normally, I exaggerate a lot worse than that. So you have to have one if you're that level of population. And then just, and you can elaborate when you're giving us more information if you want to. If we wanted to further limit them, really the best way to deal with this with townships and smaller cities would be for them to have the county absorb them, correct?
Or potentially, or just mirror what we're doing and, administer their own, zoning and limits.
So if a community wanted to have it. Yeah, I was wondering the same thing. And members, I think if you've got something that's coming up as we're going along, it probably makes sense in this case to ask them. And you'll tell us if you want us, you'll get to it later.
Madam Chair, just to clarify, the law does not say that every community has to have
Right.
one. You have to allow up to 1 per 12.5. So you're not that's been a question. You're not in violation of the statute if somebody doesn't want to locate in your community.
And because we're roughly 162,000 as a county, that's how you get to the 13. And some of that may be absorbed, or all of it, we're hearing you say might be absorbed by incorporated areas that make their own. And if they don't, we still need to have 13, or allow 13 in the county.
And we have very few cities, Madam Chair, that are over 12,500 population.
Right, and that's why, going back to your point, this might unusually be a time where they don't want to be part of us. But that may be something that will be further explored as we're going through this process.
Yeah, I do
Go
have a
ahead,
question
go ahead.
because
I mean,
now
just let me know.
I'm confused,
Yeah.
which it happens quite often. So then small townships, can they deny having a retail location in their township?
If there are enough within the county.
Correct. So
If we
earlier,
meet-
as I said, if there's
Yeah.
already 13 across the county, then the township can go ahead and deny. Is that correct?
Yeah, they could through us.
Yes.
As a township. Now, if a township decided to be their own local government unit, which they could do, then they would have their own set of rules that they would decide and administer.
Okay.
But for the purposes of a small township, yes, we would, that would be included as part of our number. And so let's think about, for the sake of argument, let's assume that all of Stearns unincorporated, there isn't even 10, right? All of them that you're gonna see could be in the cities. Then it's, it isn't an issue at all and wouldn't be. It's just when you have to allow that much, if the businesses apply to be in our areas, so.
I think we'll need a one-pager with a nice graphic to help, not just us, but everybody else understand what that means. And, it would not be good for us to make assumptions about what some of the other local units of government may or may not want, because they may have somebody within their community that wants to do this, and they want to allow them to do it. That's certainly up to them.
And the opposite's true too. If we don't have 13 and the applicant meets the requirements for a license, we can't say no.
Right. Okay.
So, okay, and then another area that we did cover earlier is the hours of sales, and that's one of the other areas that it's at section 8.3 that you might want to look at that. My intent when I put this together was to basically mimic what we have in the alcoholic beverage ordinance, so that when you think about it, you did ask earlier about whether a business could get licenses that, say, a current liquor store or a current bar, restaurant. Yes, they can seek a license and get an endorsement that would cover on-sale consumption if it's approved by the Office of Cannabis Management. We don't have the ability to just say, no, you can't be licensed because we just don't want you here. The Office of Cannabis Management has operational requirements, licensing requirements, and they do give us the opportunity, and that's kind of, if you go through the ordinance we propose, the local government has the opportunity to review certain things, time, place, and manner, as Angie spoke, zoning initially with regard to licensure, and then thereafter with registration on an annual basis, the local government unit, which may be a city, it may be the county, would have the ability to review to see if they're meeting their requirements on an annual basis with operational requirements. And if they are, then they're renewed, their registration is renewed once the initial registration takes place. And we get to do the yearly or more compliance checks to see that they are continuing to follow the rules. And
Madam Chair, Commissioners, and this maybe provides a little better context to my initial comments. Before it ever comes to us, the applicant will obviously go to the state, the OCM, to get their license. Now, we're hoping that they have all of these boxes checked when it comes to us, and our review should be pretty straightforward if it fits the statute. But we don't know that yet, right? Because we haven't had any of these situations arise. So we are hopeful that the licensing process and the annual process that they're required to do satisfies a lot of our requirements in our ordinance, and it would be an easier checkoff. Because what we don't want to have to do is get involved in the administration of the licensing.
Right.
We just want to make sure it fits the statute, and if it does, then go from there.
I guess that's about all I have to say on as far as presentation for the initial thing. This is just our initial showing to you of our proposed ordinance.
It's helpful, and it's, at least even though I've obviously read or worked on many documents of policy that are very dense, it is hard to read them. So it helps for others to get to be here. Mr. May, did you have anything you wanted to be adding?
I just wanted to kind of in conclusion, obviously as we're identifying, there's a lot of questions, and obviously feel free to email us any and all questions. As you also are finding out, we may or oftentimes won't be able to answer them yet because we don't have the entire process or how that's going to work. But again, in any area that you do find a question or have a concern, make sure to let us know, and we'll do what we can to best figure that out.
Madam Chair, one last thing I would mention too is, as you know, for the zoning side of things, we have our memorandums of understanding with our townships. So I've gone through each of them. I think there's 17 we have MOUs with, and so I've gone through each one of them, and they're written a little different. So I plan to notify the townships that if they do nothing before January 1st, cannabis becomes their responsibility because of how it is written. And so I've done that. Again, that's part of what I want to communicate out to townships with the public hearing notice as well. So I think in further conclusion, it would be asking the board if you want us to come back again to have another discussion, but more importantly, just setting a date for that public hearing.
And I don't think we're done with questions. I know Commissioner Bertram has some and other members might. So let's go through whatever those might be for today. And as we're sending you ones, and yeah, I am acknowledging that there's a need for a bathroom break. So we'll hopefully go through those pretty quickly. But as you're getting questions and you're answering them, just let us all know, because I think a lot of times we have similar questions that we may or may not have stated. So it's helpful to do that. And then the other question is, well, you'd indicated early in November, it is election day on the 5th. So is it too late to do it on the 19th so we can have more people come? We want people out lots of people do their civic, we got a lot of election judges, among other things, that are tied up on the 5th.
Is that a question, Madam
Yes.
Chair? I believe that November 19th could work. I think that you would not want to continue it.
No.
It could work, yes.
Well, it sounds like December 17th is super late, and
Yeah.
our third meeting. So members, I guess a question would be, and Commissioner Bertram, I haven't forgotten you, is would people be okay with doing November 19th for the public hearing?
Madam Chair, I was going to suggest, and I don't have a problem with that, but rather than having another discussion and then a public hearing, I was going to suggest, do we have the public hearing and then potentially another discussion, or a discussion obviously after the public hearing, whichever way, because we may get some input that we
Right.
may want to.
Although-
So when do we do
Although
that?
we wanted, I'm hearing, and I think from the other end of this, the sooner we have our determinations, the better. And if we're going to go much longer, I think we will have to take a quick break. Is that correct? So I think on the earlier end, because we want to give people notice, us making a decision into December will make it much more challenging for folks.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, I think what we were considering, it's just a recommendation, but if we did choose the November 19th date as the public hearing, we would be more than happy and willing to come to a meeting before that date, between now and that date.
Okay.
To then further answer questions and then see if we've generated further questions.
And then potentially even on December 3rd, if we needed to, we could go. Because it is very possible. We don't want people to think that it's a done deal. We often change things as we're going.
Well,
Hopefully, we wouldn't need a special meeting.
And Madam Chair, again, typically the board wants to allow townships time to be more
Yes.
restrictive
So if
for
we go
zoning.
too early, it will be hard for them.
Yeah, it'll be hard for them to get a
So why don't we
hearing.
plan on, if it's okay, members, to set it, we'll look for a motion to set it on the public hearing on the 19th with hopefully more information coming back and including from the townships and the small cities, and then recognizing that we may need a little bit more time to make our final approval of the ordinance, depending on what we hear back from folks.
Do you want that motion now?
Yeah.
So move.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second on the public hearing date. Commissioner Lenzmeyer.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with the public hearing. I would point out that there are other parts of the country that are much farther along in dealing with issues like this. I would, for example, I think it's Sonoma County, it's north of San Francisco. They've been dealing with this for over a decade. And I guess that, I remember sitting in an AMC conference where these folks did a presentation. So feel free to reach out. There are resources and examples of, well, at least county jurisdictions that have gone through this process. So we don't have to reinvent something. Maybe we can learn from other folks' experience. But no, this isn't just a challenge for us. AMC must have something on this, and I hope you checked it out.
Sounds like they did, and you're right. There's lots of other places that have done this. Let's go ahead and vote on the motion. If that's okay. Setting the public hearing on November 19th. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, we'll have the public hearing then. Commissioner Bertram, I know you've got some additional questions, and this isn't our last attempt, so why don't,
Should we do the bathroom break first, or?
I'm just trying to figure out if somebody
I'm
needs to
okay.
go, they could go ahead and go.
Okay. Madam Chair, a couple questions. First of all, Angie, thank you for all the work you've done. I mean, we've asked a lot of questions, over the course, and I have personally, and I appreciate all the work, and certainly Assistant County Attorneys Tyson, May. I mean, you've done a lot of work on this. There's no secret. Everybody's heard this. I think this is a terrible idea. We don't have no control of that. This is going to cause trouble. And what bothers me is the state doesn't know. I've never seen something in government, and I've been involved a few years, that something's passed and the top doesn't know what's going on. And then, of course, it drifts all the way down, and then we're mandated to do it. It's going to happen. And so that's a problem for all of us. And so I really want to limit the number. I want to limit the times. We can always grow. We can change it. But I want to start as conservatively as we can because I do believe this is going to cause problems in more than one way. Garbage truck drivers, school bus drivers, they're all going to be tested and everything else. But our physicians and a lot of other people, we're going to have heart replacement, heart surgery, and the doctor could be as high as a kite and there's no testing going on.
That's
On and on and
cheerful.
on. Well, it's a reality, and it is what it is. But I assume you're consulting with the sheriff's office and the sheriff, making sure, because again, this isn't the same as alcohol. This is a little different, but I assume you're talking to them and the sheriff association and going through all this. Can you buy, and I assume you can buy anywhere. You could buy it in Colorado, you can buy it in Benton County or Todd County and use it in Stearns County. So you're not restricted to where you buy it.
Commissioner Bertram, correct, if it's legal to buy in those areas, the individuals always have a question to ask themselves when they're transporting. Can they transport through certain states? So, but that would be an individual determination.
And growers, I assume on the same token, you could grow it in Stearns County and sell it to anybody in the state of Minnesota. If you're a licensed retailer, you could grow it in Stearns County and sell it in Hennepin County.
Where?
Hennepin County.
With the correct.
Yeah, Commissioner Bertram, yes, if you had the correct number of licenses that allow transport and.
All that stuff.
Yep.
And Commissioner Bertram, I'm just going to ask you what questions because we all probably want to say what we think about this, which we might do more around the public
Oh, I'm
hearing
done
time.
doing that already, but I would have done that anyway, but thank you. And then the 3-day event, the 3-day event, I mean, it could be like a pot fest. I mean, 3 days.
Yep, I already said that.
And that's,
Or is it 4?
4 day.
4.
oh, good,
Time
we're
is
adding
4
a day.
days.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, maybe we should cut it off before it gets worse. And then lots of unknowns, as I said. The burden on the local government part, I'm always sensitive, as I've always said. I mean, there's no way I read all of this. I read a lot of it, but and the local units of government are not going to. So when you do that, I just would encourage you, Angie, when you're talking, just make it a bulletproof thing, saying you have to consider doing or not doing this, and then understand this, because they're limited in staff and everything of how to totally understand this. There's a lot of unknowns to us, and we AMC's done a great job at the fall conference and those really making a lot of presentations. And I'm sure they're getting some information, but I don't think they're getting the information that we're getting at that level. So let's be sensitive to that. And I think I'll hold the rest. And in the analysis of the zoning regulations, it says based on similar uses. I assume the similar uses are alcohol, or what similar uses? I'm just wondering, what are we comparing this to?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ms. Berg.
I can get you more detail on that, but in terms of, for example, retail sales is allowed in commercial, manufacturing is allowed in industrial, and you'll also see in that chart that cultivation is proposed as a conditional use in the ag districts. So the concept there would be, right or wrong, but the concept proposal is that if you're growing cannabis or you're growing corn or you're growing soybeans, you're growing something. And so that would be the similar land use is what I'm looking at there.
Got it. Thank you. That's it.
Anybody else right now? Anybody else? Okay, let's keep thinking, ask other questions. If we hear things from residents or businesses, let's make sure we're forwarding them there too. And then it'll be good to have some more information as we're getting on along about this, including what you're hearing from questions from townships and cities too. And with that, thank you. And I want to reiterate to what Commissioner Bertram said, the work you've been putting into this is immense. I know it's not just the three of you. We'll go ahead and take a brief recess, and we will come back and move on to our human service agenda.
Good morning.
It's good to be here, and we appreciate the work that your division is also, the department and divisions are doing, working on our last item as well. So it looks like you've got a couple items.
I do. I was going to say good morning, but I have exactly 1 minute before it's good afternoon. So
Still counts.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. Melissa Huberty, I'm the Human Services Administrator, and I have 2 items on the Human Services consent agenda today. The first item is H1 on page 146, and it's the Employment First Capacity Building Grant. And the goal of this grant is actually to take some of our folks with the most substantial disabilities and help them gain employment, keep employment, and also not to avoid sub-minimal minimum wage jobs. So what we're hoping to do is to receive this grant and then to RFP out for those who are experts in this field and actually work with our folks to avoid those sub-minimum wage jobs. You'll notice in the attachments that there was comments about we don't know the exact amount of the grant. The reason for that is there's some confusion with the Department of Human Services. It is our understanding that they're still working with a number of regions in the state. And so if those regions choose not to accept any funds for this, then we will get even more money than we're asking for here. So it's our understanding that we will receive this minimum amount for 2 years with the potential to receive any more after that. So, and the second item is H2 on page 149. It's just claims paid on behalf of Human Services clients, and I am available for questions.
And the first one, you're looking for action, right? They'll be
To accept the
approving-
grant, yeah.
Right, to accept it. Members, are there questions or comments? And I know one of the things I was wondering is with the first one, there's other community partners that we work with. Just for the public, do you mind?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioners, that is our plan, is to work, particularly because we'd like to RFP for the folks in the community who do this work and are experts at this, so that we have folks who connect with the employers in the area, but we would be focusing on Stearns County for this work, yes.
Madam Chair, I'll move the first motion. And then a quick question. If I read it right, there's no match requirement?
Correct,
Yep.
Madam Chair. Commissioner Bertram, there is no match.
And I think also what I'm hearing you say, because we do good work, if not all the other funds get allocated, we may be able to do more. Okay, good.
Now you
So-
can see, good afternoon.
is there-
Yeah, good afternoon.
Thank you.
Is there
Madam
a
Chair,
second?
Commissioners, that is correct.
I'll second that with a question.
Okay.
Does that involve cooperation with WCOSA? Is that?
That is my understanding, Madam Chair, Commissioner Persky, that would be a vendor, and we would be working with all of those providers so that we can avoid those sub-minimal wage jobs.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, but do not take that as this is not an important item. There's a motion and a second. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, that is done. And thank you for the information on the claims. Is there any miscellaneous items for today?
I have none unless you have something for me, Madam Chair, Commissioners.
Just one quick thing to point it out. Again, when we were in DC, focusing on transportation, Senator Klobuchar's office in particular, we're coming up with some other items, and they were asking about childcare needs and the challenges. So we talked a little bit about that throughout the county. So thank people for their work, and we just need to keep working on that item.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Wow.
That one was quick. Okay, administration. We are now on to, this is the reason why we're making sure we're having this meeting today. We need to approve the preliminary levy. Dr. Williams, turn it over to you and Mr. Schweifels.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. We don't have a presentation for you today with the budget. We started, as you know, we start with staff. We start this process way back in April and May, and the board started its review in July. And you might recall we have roughly a $211 million budget, which is considerably higher than previous years, but we have $42 million in highway construction that includes a $9 million with town line roads. So that factors into some of the numbers here. But in essence, you have a $97 million property tax levy to support that over $200 million in expenditures. That 97 million is a 4.1% increase in the total levy. The tax rate will actually go down a little bit, about 0.5%. As you also recall, we are using some fund balance here, but not as much as we have in the last couple of years. So as you said, Madam Chair, the board needs to adopt a preliminary levy before the end of the month, and then you have time if we want to review any parts for the budget in the future. But the next action you would need to take would be to hold the Truth and Taxation hearing, which we've scheduled for December 3rd. And then the last action you would need to take is before the end of the year, adopt the final budget, the levy and budget. And your last meeting of the year today is scheduled for December 17th. So today is a need for action to set that preliminary levy, and that resolution is included in your packet and would adopt the preliminary levy, just as you saw the budget at our last time we talked about the budget.
Okay. Members, do you have any questions for Dr. Williams or Mr. Schreifels? I know we all appreciate the significant work that's been going into this, particularly the hard work of saying no, because we need to make sure we're getting that down. And for the public, reminding you this, just to reiterate it, this would be the highest we could approve. So members, any questions? If not, looking for a motion to be adopting the resolution for the preliminary budget and property tax levy for 2025.
I could see doing that. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. I have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it, Madam
Thank
Chair.
you. Thank you, Commissioner Lenzmeyer, Commissioner Notch. Knowing that we've spent good time on this and we'll continue to, we'll go ahead and move to voting on the motion. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. We have a preliminary levy and a preliminary budget. Again, please thank everybody for all the work on this. Lastly, we've got time for issues by commissioners. Before we get to that, Mr. Schreifels or Dr. Williams, do either of you have anything that you want to make sure gets said right now? Okay. All right, then we'll move over here. Commissioner Bertram.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Couple of points. One, the question on the $85 sales tax per home, that's a new question for me. I wouldn't mind an answer for that at some point during the presentation. So if you wouldn't mind answering that at some point now or whenever, I would like to have an answer. Or do we know that?
I can answer that.
Okay.
So
Mr. Schreifels.
the study came in from the University of Minnesota that studied the sales tax, and it's $34 per person is what they came up with. The census has the average household size at 2.5 people. So 34 times 2.5 is $85.
Got it.
So the $34
Per person.
is an important thing for people to
Right.
remember and for us to be talking about.
That's the first time I've heard that question. That's a good question.
Then we also look at the average homesteaded property, 262 at the time we were doing it. It's of course a little higher now, but the property tax is $185 on that.
Got it. And then just remind people, harvest time, a lot of crops are going to be taken out in the next week, so be careful on the roads and be aware of farm equipment and everything else as the farmers do that. And then please weigh in on the marijuana pot stuff. I mean, we need to hear comments from people on that, I think. And of course, the justice meetings that are happening around the county, please continue to follow that. The first one in my district is tonight in Cold Spring. And so by all means, keep following that, keep talking to us, as I know a lot of people are, so.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Lenzmeyer.
Oh, there's a host of information on the marijuana aspect of this. California this has been a reality if you're a commissioner in California for over a decade. And in some areas, I think, I was gonna say it was Sonoma County, but it might be I don't know if I have that correct or not, but the amount of growth was so strong that when you drove through the countryside, such as it was, yeah, you could smell it. It's remarkable. So there's other parts of the country that have a much more extensive experience with this. And I hope like AMC or one of our organizations affiliated with national organizations, I hope we jump on this. We're not reinventing the wheel.
Thank you. Commissioner Notch.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was just going to mention, so last week I attended 2 jail justice center meetings. The one in St. Martin was the first one, and then we did Melrose. Melrose was the presentation, which actually was a very lively discussion, a lot of good questions. At the end, I think most of them realized that it's not so much about the total cost as it is people understanding that either if you don't agree to do the sales tax, it's going to more than likely be up to the board to do a property tax levy. So I know the people that were there were pretty adamant to, even to the local newspaper, that, you know, that they should strongly make people aware that the sales tax option would probably, especially if you're a property owner, is probably, you know, the option that is best for everyone. So, and then this week, tomorrow night is El Rosa in my district, and Thursday is in Albany. So you know, it's good that people come out. I was disappointed St. Martin was basically 2 county staff myself. So, but, you know, again, there was no presentation there. It was just a meeting. So we'll see how tomorrow night and Thursday goes. And then Monday we have Chasm, so it's at 9. I don't know if it's just going to be us 3 or if anybody's calling in, just so we have an idea.
Commissioner Persky.
Yes, I just want to comment about the Justice Center too. I attended a meeting at the St. Cloud Library with put on by the League of Women Voters, and obviously we had a good house. I think it was 50 to 60 folks. Great presentation. However, I think there was at the end a lot of folks had questions, and sometimes they seem to be getting into the specifics of what we're actually building opposed to the sales tax. And I think it's important that we make sure that they understand that's the gist of the question is how we're going to pay for this, exposed to the minutia of what we're actually building. So we know what we need, but what we're building, those plans are still being drawn up. So by all means, it seems like people are very favorable about the sales tax, I think. So it's a better way to do it than the property tax. And then I also just want to comment, Commissioner Bertram, Commissioner Clark, myself, Jody Tyke, and Glenn Lauer from Leasock Township, or St. Wendell Township, were out at the DC this past week in transportation. And as Randy had mentioned, we've got $9 million of funds we're looking for Town Line Road that we're using actually as the pass-through. And it looks very favorable that we're going to get $1.5 million of that from a House bill that includes congressional directed spending. So that, again, those $9 million will not be realized by the county, but actually from the state and from the feds. And that project, of course, has been something we've been working on for quite some time. So excited to see that that's probably going to happen. And yeah, it was a good trip, a lot of good information.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a fruitful trip, a good opportunity to be meeting with folks, and it was glad to see right after we left, they came up with how they're going to make sure our government continues and not have a shutdown, and I'm sure it was all because we were there. Okay, it had nothing to do with it. They put up with us in spite of the fact they had a lot on their plates. There were even more than what you counted there. There was probably close to 100 people there. Got a chance to stay after the presentation and talked and listened to a number of people, a lot of positivity. Representative Perryman was there and reminding folks that this was something that our delegation bipartisanly came together because they know that we have the needs for the the jail, for the law enforcement and the courts, and that having this way to be able to pay for them when so many others are utilizing the jail and the courts is a really important thing. I think your points are well taken. People think they're going to be able to come and see the full-blown it, and we don't have the full-blown yet, but hopefully they understand that we're going to work together to come up with something that's as cost-effective as possible that's going to meet the needs. So that was a very good thing. There is going to be, look on our website, there's going to be one coming up in Whitney at Whitney Senior Center during the day soon. We're going to be doing a Rotary presentation at the St. Cloud Rotary, as well as a number of these other community ones. If people have questions, they should please reach out. There's a lot of effort that's gone into this to make sure that we are transparent, so when questions come up like they did earlier today, let's make sure we answer them. And with we are adjourned.
you.